how you doing? Glad you could make it. Today I'm going to focus on good sentences. Now, most of the GED it's about correcting bad sentences. But I want to give you an example of good sentences, or several examples of good sentences, because I want to have you use that as a template in your own writing. Also, when you're doing proofreading, I want you to see how good sentences are constructed. We're going to start off with a sentence from a famous author named Ralph Ellison. He wrote Invisible Man. But this sentence comes from a short story called Manners and Morals at Minton's, 1941, the setting for a revolution. He wrote this in 1959. Minton's is a famous jazz club, or was a famous jazz club in Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance. Here people improvised, created jazz, created art, and did things they had to do because they didn't have a whole lot of money, but they had a real creative spirit. Setting for a revolution, this is 1959. If you know a little bit about U.S. history, in 1959, late 1950s and early 60s was the beginning of the civil rights movement. I'm going to show you the sentence, I'm going to read it to you, and show you some of the punctuation and what makes it a good sentence. The barefooted drummer, comma, beating a folded newspaper with whisk brooms in lieu of a drum, stirs the eye's ear like a blast of brasses in the midnight street. Ends with a period. It's a very evocative sentence. It really brings out emotions. Let's start off with the first part of the sentence. Of course, all sentences start with a capital letter, the barefooted drummer. You get the idea. This guy doesn't have a whole lot of money, or this woman doesn't have a whole lot of money. Can't afford shoes, and is out there drumming away. Then you see a comma. And what he's doing is beating a folded newspaper with whisk brooms. Whisk brooms are old-fashioned brooms that you could hold in your hand and splayed out like this, and it's made of broom-like material, and it must have made like a drum sound. In lieu of a drum is a fancy way for saying in place of a drum. It's acting like a drum, but it's in lieu of a drum. It's actually a French word, in lieu of. Well, the lieu is. Now here's the interesting part. You see he has a comma here and a comma there. If you took that big part of the sentence out, you could still say, the barefooted drummer stirs the eye's ears like a blast of brasses in the midnight street. You could take that part out. Those two commas sets that part of the sentence apart. Let's keep going. Stirs the eye's ear. What he's saying is this. You're listening and looking at the same time. And it stirs it. It moves it. It makes it feel great. It explodes your eardrums. And he's just going just with some brooms on a newspaper. But it's a subtle sound. It's a quiet sound. Then he says, like a blast of brasses. When he says brasses, he means brass instruments, trumpet, horns, loud instruments. So even though he's being subtle with this little newspaper and whisk brooms, and it's quiet and subtle, it blows your mind because of what he's doing with his little instruments. His little barefooted self out there with whisk brooms on the newspaper, and he's going to town like nobody's business, and he's blowing your mind. Now look, in the midnight street. So here he is out there when he should be asleep. If he's, this brother could be homeless. And he's out in the midnight street just jamming away, creating his art when no one may be around him except you and him, and he's doing his thing. And his jazz is so good, it's blowing you away. It stirs your eye's ears like a blast of brasses in the midnight street. That's a wonderfully constructed sentence because it gives you a real picture. Every sentence is a story, and it makes you want to dig deeper and deeper into what's going on. So as you read sentences in the newspaper or short stories or whatever else you do, you want to read like you're reading the GED. You really want to read with appreciation. And you really see a good sentence, you may want to underline it and see what's good about it. It will not only improve your writing, it will also improve your proofreading skills. Let's do another sentence. This sentence, I'll just read it out so you can get the appreciation part. Everywhere he goes, the questions seem the same, as if he has some special vision into the future of new heroes. And everywhere he goes too, older men grab his hand and feel his arm and predict that he could still go out there and hit one. And the smile on DiMaggio's face is genuine. Let's talk about DiMaggio. DiMaggio is Joe DiMaggio, a famous baseball hitter who used to play for the Yankees. Joltin' Joe was his nickname. He had so many home runs and got on base so often. Here they're talking about what happened to Joe DiMaggio way after he retired, because he was still so famous. In fact, Joe DiMaggio was so famous he ended up marrying Marilyn Monroe. Now let's get the picture of what's going on. You see Joe DiMaggio walking down the street, perhaps in New York, and it says, everywhere he goes, the questions seem the same, as if he had some special vision into the future. This guy was a baseball player, and a retired baseball player, as if he had some special vision into the future. Here we are making a god out of a baseball player. And he has some vision of new heroes because he's an old hero. And also everywhere he goes too, older men who remember Joe DiMaggio when he was young grab his hand and feel his arm because they want his power. And then he says they can predict he could still go out there and hit one. And Joe DiMaggio smiles at them, and he really believes it, and he's one with his fans, and he's really a great guy. And Joe DiMaggio's face is genuine, even though he's heard it 1,000 times. Like I'm saying, every sentence is a story in and of itself. And that's a great sentence, because you get the whole picture of what's going on in Joe DiMaggio's life, and how it is to be Joe DiMaggio, just for a minute. How it is to be the great one. But again, the punctuation's still good. Commas are in the right places. You see it starts with a capital letter, ends with a period. Complete sentence. A longer sentence than most of you would write, and a complicated sentence because it's written by a professional writer. But this is the idea of a flow of a sentence and how it should work. Let's do one more sentence. This sentence is from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He wrote 100 Years of Solitude. Totally changed the scene. The house was far from everything, in the heart of the desert, next to a settlement with miserable, burning streets where the goats committed suicide from desolation when the winds of misfortune blew. You really get the feel of how terrible being in that house was. Let's just start off from the very part of the sentence. Again, a sentence is a story. The house was far from everything. Far from everything. In the heart of the desert, surrounded by nothing. Next to a settlement of miserable, burning streets. It's hot. It's the desert. Where the goats committed suicide from desolation. Goats are lonely animals going around eating trash, doing something. They're still bad. Things are so messed up for the goats. They're willing to commit suicide because the desolation of the winds of misfortune blew. Even the goats were having bad luck. That's how messed up this little house was, and this little town. It was just terrible. But you really get it. Again, these sentences are evocative. They bring out the emotion. The Joe DiMaggio sentence was very positive. This sentence is extremely negative. Sentences can give you the emotional highs and emotional lows. Again, punctuation is correct, everything is good, everything is spelled correctly. But you're really trying to get that flow of the sentence. On the GED, they're going to talk about simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. This is a fairly complex sentence. A, because it's so long, uses a lot of care. A house is far from everything is an independent clause. In the heart of the desert is a dependent clause. Next to the settlement with miserable burning streets where the goats committed suicide from desolation. Desolation means loneliness. And the wind of misfortune blew. But again, the commas give you an idea, give you different pictures of the story. The house was far from everything, in the heart of the desert, next to a miserable, burning streets, where even the goats committed suicide from the desolation when winds of misfortune blew. This place is not a fun place when good things are going on. But when misfortune blows, the winds of misfortune, even the goats commit suicide. Let's go to another sentence. Houston, we have a moron. What you realize here is the shorter a sentence is, the more background information you need. Have you ever heard a sentence like this before? Have you ever heard the sentence, Houston, we have a problem? Fantastic. Let me say, for those who don't know, you may remember that in the Apollo 13, if you saw the movie, or if you're old enough to remember it, Apollo 13 is a rocket ship that went to the moon carrying 3 people, and all of a sudden they got into a lot of trouble. And the famous line from the movie and the famous line from reality was, Houston, we have a problem. In this case, some goofball comes on a radio station or something and says something really stupid, and Houston, we have a moron, playing off that same sentence they used back in 1972 or whenever Apollo 13 was. Okay? So Houston, we have a moron is a play on that, so it's kind of funny. It's a short sentence. It's not like a longer sentence we had before, but same thing. Houston, we have a moron. He's not really talking about the literal Houston. Houston was where they were talking to Apollo 13 on the ground. Let's do one more sentence. Now, short sentence, really long sentence, but again, tells a story. But you have to, again, the commas and other punctuation within the sentence to make it go. This sentence is almost a paragraph long, and it's a properly written sentence. But you have to make sure you have all the clauses and phrases correct. And again, it sets the story. In the last years of the 17th century, there was found to be among the fops and fools of London coffee houses one rangy, gangling flitch called Ebenezer Cook, more ambitious than talented, and yet more talented than prudent, who, like his friends in folly, all of whom were supposed to be educated at Harvard or Cambridge, big schools in England, he found the sound of Mother English more fun to game with, have fun with, than her sense to labor over. And so rather than applying himself to the pains of scholarship, studying hard, he had learned the knack of versifying, making poems, and ground out choirs of couplets, choirs like 5, 10, 15 couplets, poems, after the fashion of the day. A froth with Jove's and Jupiter's gods, a clang with jarring rhymes, and string taut with similes stretched to the snapping point. The short version of the sentence is, the guy was wasting his time writing poems instead of being serious. But the deal is, making a sentence so long, it gives it a sense of importance and how foolish this guy really was. But he really was talented. He had a knack for versifying, for making poems. But the deal is, the sentence is so long, but it's right because you see the commas and everything is described by everything right after it. In the last years of the 17th century, there was found among the fops and fools of London coffee houses one guy, one rangy, gangling filch. Now, you might not know what that word is, but you get the idea. It's nothing good. Called Ebenezer Cook. More ambitious and talented and so forth. And he goes on and describes everything going on with Ebenezer and tells the full story. And he tells what he's all about. Charles Dickens, from A Tale of Two Cities. This is the first line of this book. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was an epoch, a long time, of belief. It was an epoch of incredulity, disbelief. It was the season of light. It was a season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, and it was the winter of despair. The beauty of this sentence is going back and forth to opposites. This is the first line of his book, Tale of Two Cities. It really makes you want to read the rest of it. What kind of time, you're asking? No? It doesn't make you want to read the rest of it? Sure it does. Come on, it was the best of times and worst of times. It was the age of wisdom and the age of foolishness. You gotta be kidding me. This is a fantastic book. At least it's a fantastic sentence. You say nay, I say yay. You're absolutely wrong about this. Because it goes back and forth, and really gets you. What kind of story can be both good and bad? Foolish yet wise. The season of light and the season of darkness. Hope and despair. It makes you wonder what kind of season it was. And it's talking about the French Revolution. Thank you so much.